Hello everyone and welcome back to Blockbuster Reviews. This is your favorite place for the coolest reviews of the hottest things. The movie we're going to be reviewing today is called Bad Boys Part 4. It is the fourth installment of the very successful blockbuster series of the Bad Boy movies. Now, for those of you who have no idea about the Bad Boy franchise, I'm going to give you a little bit of history so we can come to discussing the present movie. Bad Boys started in 1995. That's when the first part of the movie was released, starring Martin Lawrence and Will Smith as two lead characters who play police officers who go against the bad boys. And this movie was produced at only $23 million and ended up making $65 million at the US box office, which means that the movie was actually a hit. However, surprisingly, it took almost 8 years for the producers to understand the potential of this movie, that this standalone film could in fact be converted into a franchise. At the turn of the century, in 2003, after 8 years of the first part coming out, Bad Boys Part 2 was released, and it was made with a production budget of $130 million and ended up making only $138 million. This $8 million at the US box office was a very big disappointment for the producers. They had gotten ambitious with making the franchise out of the movie, and in doing so, their sales had plummeted. Then it took them another 17 years to come out with the third part, which came out in 2020, and this was called Bad Boys for Life. Bad Boys for Life was a very highly rated movie with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 76% and the general using ratings of about 80 to 90%. Everybody liked the movie. The movie was a hit globally, and the movie was made in only $90 million and ended up grossing $204 million at the US box office, and these earnings were, by any standard, phenomenal. 4 years later, they came out with the fourth part, Bad Boys Ride or Die, which came out about a week and a half ago, and this movie unfortunately is not doing very well at the US box office. Granted that the movie does not have complete financial data available to it because it's only been running for about 10 days, but in Hollywood they say the first week or the opening weekend is everything, so we have enough data to make our conclusions about whether or not this movie is headed in the right direction. The problem with this movie turned out to be, there was a very big debate when this movie was released whether or not the movie was going to do well, because Will Smith and his Oscar slap stunt that happened unfortunately made his career a very questionable one. People were expecting that the movie was not going to do very well because right before this movie, Emancipation had come out, his movie, nobody went to see the movie. It was just nobody wanted to see the movie because of the Oscar slap, and also at the same time, during the COVID time, Will Smith's autobiography came out and nobody read that. It was just lying on the shelves. People did not want to go close to it. People did not want to do anything with Will Smith. Was Ride or Die going to be a successful movie was in large part going to be determined by the fact that Will Smith, whether or not he was going to be accepted by the general public. So this was a little bit of history of Bad Boys, and now we're going to go to the second part, which is studying the financials of the movie to see how the movie is doing in comparison to the rest of the movies in the franchise, and then in comparison to the rest of the movies that are running in the US box office, particularly those that were released in 2024. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the financials of the movie as we've discussed. The chart that you see behind me shows the earnings of each one of the 4 movies that have been running since the franchise was released. The green line you see at the bottom is showing the earnings of Bad Boys Part 1. You go a little bit higher than that. The red line shows the earnings of Bad Boys Part 2. Go a little bit higher. It's showing the earnings of Bad Boys Part 3. And between the last line and the second last line, you see a yellow line, which is still developing, which is basically the earnings of Part 4, Ride or Die. Okay, so now the third part of the review involves us putting together the movie or taking it apart. And in this case, we're going to be tearing it apart because the movie has some serious flaws. In particular, there are 4 things that the movie has gotten completely wrong. Number 1 is the plot. The plot of the movie comes with a shortcoming that it is a very, very commonplace plot that we've been seeing in movies since the 1980s. It's something that is so commonplace and is something so redundant that it's surprising that in this day and age they couldn't come up with something a little bit more ingenious than this. So the basic plot is that Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, they're basically cops. We know that right from the start of the franchise. They have a head of the department who dies in the last part, and somebody transfers money into his account, and he's being considered as a corrupt officer in the eyes of the law, and it is upon these two to clear his name. Just hearing the plot, I'm sure that you can also tell that it is something that is completely without any luster. The second problem is that there's very, very weak emotional connection between the characters. In particular, there is a new character introduced in the third part of the franchise, which is Will Smith's son that he does not know about. He's reintroduced in this part, and they try to create an emotional connection between the father and the son, but it does not come through in the movie at all. In fact, there are moments that the camera is just focused entirely on these two, but somehow you're more interested in eating your popcorn and having your coffee than the conversation that is happening between these two stars. The emotional connection is a problem is not just limited to these two characters. Overall, throughout the entire movie, the emotional aspect is just very, very weak. The third thing, or the third problem, is the jokes. Now, the jokes have this issue that they are simply not very good. In an action comedy movie, you want two things to be very good. A, action, B, comedy. I mean, it's just putting two and two together. So we'll discuss about what the action looks like, but first, the comedy part, because that is what makes an action comedy fueled up and liked by other people. Now, what we're going to be looking at here is the jokes, which are actually based mostly on reincarnation. For some reason, Martin Lawrence has been given the lines of making jokes about reincarnation. And initially they're funny, sure, but later on they kind of become redundant. It's like this stand-up comedian who keeps on talking about the same thing over and over again. You want the person to move on to talk about other things. And unfortunately, it does not happen. It's simply all of the jokes are a bit, they're kind of like a bit tainted. They're not really all that funny. They're not captivating. They're not ingenious. They're nothing new that we've heard. So, and to be honest, this overall humor seems very forced. The number four thing is the action. And the action we also feel has not been something that we have never seen before. The action sequence, there's only one action sequence throughout the movie in which the house is being invaded. Martin Lawrence's house is being invaded by these bad guys, and his son steps up and really does something about the whole situation, killing 15 people with one gun and performing these heroics. But apart from that, maybe 2 or 3 minute scene, the action sequences are not that interesting. They are not that captivating. They have the same problem of the plot and of the jokes. They're just lackluster. The movie was produced in $100 million. That's not a very, very high budget these days. Superhero movies can go up to $200 million, $250 million, which is a common budget for Marvel movies. So $100 million is not very high. We're not complaining about the budget being very high. We're just complaining that within that budget, they could have done just so much more. Action sequences do not have to be confined to cars blowing up and people jumping off buildings. It's really the sequence of events. It's really the tension that the director is able to create between the characters that makes the action interesting, and that was not there in the movie. Some of the action sequences, you're just wondering why there's vaping going on in the cinema, which was a very big problem, by the way. The guy in front of me was vaping, and I was really annoyed at that. And that was more interesting to me than the action sequences or the jokes in the movie, and that is a very big problem. It should not be like that. So taking all of these individual components that we've studied, the plot, the shortcomings of the movie, the inflationary figures that we've seen, the production budgets that we've seen, whatever is going on in the US box office this year, the highest grossing movie was Dune 2, and it was phenomenal by any standards compared to movies such as those which are being released in the same year. I will give this movie a 6.5 out of 10, and that is a very, very generous figure that I've given. Most of the people would not give it 6 out of 10, but for some of those very entertaining parts of the movie, I am granting it a 6.5. It's a popcorn movie. You can go and see it in your spare time, but it's not something that you have to dedicate yourself to going to the cinema for watching. Until we see you for the next review next time, thank you very much for watching.